you're just thinking about launching an online course idea, or you're in the thick of it, but you just want to get more sales overall, you're gonna have to figure out a sales funnel that you like and that can work well for your audience in order to get more predictable income month over month. Webinars were something that were so helpful, and they were my highest converting tool. So I spent so much of my time perfecting that webinar sales process. So if you're new to that webinar process, or you've done a few and you're wondering what the best techniques are there to use in order to get more sales overall, you might go searching for, hey, what is the perfect webinar formula? You would probably get pages and pages of top online coaches telling you that there's a perfect formula out there that can be applied to any offer and any audience, and it's gonna get you your highest converting sales. Sounds pretty good, right? I thought the exact same thing. The problem? Not all offers are created equal, and every audience is unique. So in this video, I'm gonna share 5 rules I broke, yeah, absolutely threw out the window, in order to get my highest converting sales webinar ever on my online course program. 15 to 20K months, month over month. I was able to take that high converting webinar, turn it evergreen, and then deliver it both through cold traffic and paid ads, and my warm traffic organically through my social media pages. And something I shared with my audience that helped me get to know me as a person, as well as my overall purpose, and a tactic that I used that made them say yes and buy on the webinar rather than,
oh, I love this, I'm gonna come back later.
They never actually come back later. You're gonna wanna stick around for those, and let's dive into the 5 rules I broke. I thrive off being a rule breaker, especially when it leads to better sales. Okay, so my first one is, a lot of times I say, oh, you gotta have this professional setup, you have to have this fantastic video cam and natural lighting, kind of like I'm in now. How do you guys like it? However, although I think that a nice professional good lighting setup can make a little bit of a difference overall, don't let it deter you from getting started and doing a webinar. Because one of my highest converting webinars ever, I think I had a little generic ring light. Okay, here's a screenshot of what it looked like. Bad lighting, no video cam. I was truly just using the camera off of my laptop, and I pressed go. I actually remember scrambling because it was towards the end of the month, and I was like, I gotta make payroll, I gotta get more revenue for my little part-time employees. So I literally set up the back end of the webinar, launched it that night, and went live. Okay, so you don't need some fancy professional setup. You don't need the most gorgeous lighting ever. It might help, but like, it's like a pebble versus a rock. A rock is launching, doing it, connecting with your audience, providing value, where perfect lighting is like a little pebble that maybe pushes one person over the edge. So the thought there is launch, connect with your audience, and then work on improving your setup over time, but it's not a necessity to get a high converting webinar. Number 2 is I actually had no slides during that webinar. So I'd experimented previous to that, doing slides, like overkill, where you couldn't even hardly see my face for some of the webinar. And then this one I decided, I think just because I hadn't created a slide deck, hey, I'm just gonna go live, and I'm just gonna talk to Cam. And I'm gonna tell a little bit about my background, why I'm qualified to teach on this. I'm gonna do a mini lesson. I'm gonna extend a hand into my course. I'm gonna do a Q&A. I kept it super simple, and that actually absolutely hit with my audience and helped them connect and relate better to me. After that high converting webinar, I went back and kept experimenting with slides, and I found throughout my whole 5 years of doing webinars that the ones that converted the absolute best was where they could see my face for the majority of the presentation. I'm not saying that this is one of the perfect rules that's gonna apply to every audience or every offer, but it applied to mine. And I think that's the key there, is understanding that there's no perfect rules or templates that can apply to every webinar. You have to do some trial and error and experiment so you can get to know your audience and what speaks to them. Number 3 is I stopped to take questions and talk to people throughout. Sometimes this is a big no-no, and people will say, hey, this is actually gonna detract from the flow of your presentation. Sometimes these questions will bore the other attendees that don't have that question, but here's kind of the best of both worlds. So think about if you're an attendee in a webinar or a presentation, and somebody talks to you personally, calls out your name. You feel special, right? We all like to feel special. It's like when somebody, DMs us or talks back to us on social media. Having that interaction, all of a sudden that person is just more likely to buy. However, you don't want to deter and bore everybody else. So how do you kind of walk this fine line? What I would do is I would field the questions as they came in. And if something was just super specific and I knew it was only going to apply to that one person, I typically didn't even address that. But as questions came up that I knew were going to apply to the majority of the group, then I had stopping points that I would take 2 or 3 questions that were going to apply to the majority of the attendees there. So they felt like, oh, we're kind of getting this little extra that wasn't baked into the content, and it actually helped the value go up. And especially the people that I was speaking directly to, because they submitted the question, they felt more connected to me as the instructor because I answered their question specifically. Okay, number 4 is I talked about price. I actually had somebody come through and audit my webinars, and one of the things they pinpointed is oh my gosh, why are you talking about price? You're making them feel like this is a big deal. Your product is only $197. Really? You don't even need to fret, or you don't even emphasize that. However, through doing lots of surveys to people who thought about buying but didn't buy, I'm a big survey girl if you didn't know, you might like this video on surveys. I had learned through doing surveys with my audience, whether that be purchasers or people who didn't buy, I found that those who were interested but didn't end up buying listed cost as one of the main reasons as why they didn't buy. So I knew I needed to hit this objection head on and not just cross my fingers and hope that it wasn't an issue for them. So I actually stopped to talk about price and get inside their head. So this was an online course marketed to new and expectant parents. So I literally took the thought right out of their head in my messaging in the webinar and said, I know you might be thinking there's so many costs when it comes to baby. And then I talked about some things that really didn't matter for them to buy. I know you might be thinking about the perfect Pinterest nursery. I know you might be thinking about getting an expensive diaper bag because your best friend has it. I know you might be thinking about a high chair, but guess what? They won't even need the high chair for 6 months. Kind of walking them through all these reasons of here's some stuff you can do without, and here's why my product is a priority. The caveat here is when people list cost as a factor, it's never really about cost. So as a piggyback to kind of hitting that objection about money and cost and the price head on, come on, this product was under $200. Increasing their perceived value of the product so that if they didn't get the product, what were the pains that might come their way? And I talked about, hey, your baby's born and you might just be thinking you're gonna wing it, but let's talk about all the potential things that can go wrong and how my product is gonna help ease those fears and act as a tool for you and guide you smooth sailing through those potential issues that lie in store for you. Hitting the cost objection head on and then increasing the perceived value from my customer typically did the trick to get them over that hurdle. Number 5 is I told them exactly who I was and how my business was set up and ran. Okay, and what I mean by that is I was very open about the fact that I was a small woman-owned business, that I had a few part-time employees that helped me with customer success and product delivery, and a few other clinicians that helped answer questions during office hours. But instead of that being a negative, okay, because a lot of times say, well, you gotta act fake it till you make it, and you gotta act bigger than you are, and pretend you're talking to them from a corporation and whatever, okay? I mean, saying who I was, then I had a segue into, so you're not gonna be just a number in the queue. You're not just gonna be another customer. I'm gonna treat you like a VIP. I'm gonna be invested in your journey and your success, and that's why this is much better than going with just kind of a run-of-the-mill larger corporation educational program. And that actually really connected with my audience, and they felt that. And then the follow-up to that is don't just promise that, or whatever your unique value proposition is, you gotta follow through on it. They actually have the experience that turns them into a promoter and somebody who's gonna tell other people about how awesome your program is. And that's kind of like your very best marketing tool, is that you promise the great experience and then you over-deliver on a fantastic customer experience. As promised, here's a few pro tips, small things that made a huge difference in my overall conversion. So after I had done about 10 to 15 webinars, and I tested some at like 40 minutes and then some that were like an hour and 5 minutes and kind of all in between there, I noticed that the ones where my pitch landed before 40 minutes were much higher in conversion, like 5 to 10% higher. I started kind of setting that as like a general rule for myself. Hey, make sure to pitch before 40 minutes. And that ended up making a big difference for my audience. Now that's not a golden rule because your audience might convert better if it's at least over an hour long, right? So the key here is to test lots of different webinar lengths as far as time, and then see where your best conversions are, and then play around with that time over and over again and see if it holds and stays true. Another thing I started doing is I started mentioning our social good component. Something we were already doing was contributing some of our profit to charity. My first highest converting webinar was during the pandemic, so we were doing things with healthcare heroes, and I mentioned that a percentage of the profits were going to go towards that. Other months it was organizations like Every Mom Counts. So regardless of what you do, it's great to set something up, even if it's small at the beginning, 2% of profits or 1% of profits or wherever it is. It's nice to give back in that way because then your potential customers feel even better about doing your business. Don't do this for show, do it because it's something that you care about, and people will notice that. And then the last thing here is that you do want to make your offer during the webinar, at the end of the webinar, time sensitive. So people feel a little bit of pressure to make that decision today. And a lot of times it's best for both of you. You want to get more people in your program to be able to serve them and get more sales, and you want to help them get the very best price, the very best offer, and help them move along in something they're obviously interested in. Sometimes we just need that extra nudge. A couple things you can do. You can keep the price of the offer its normal price if you want, and then just add bonuses in that are only available for those that purchased that day or within 24 hours of the webinar. Something I did is I did create a little special price for the webinar. I did like $50 off. So let's say it was $147. Then I added additional bonuses, things like a workbook, things like 1 month free to our membership platform, things like additional PDFs, bundled them all in, made sure they understood what the actual value of that offer was that I crafted specifically for the webinar. And then I gave them a time limit while I dove into my Q&A. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know in the comments comments if you've done your first webinar. And remember that there's no set or perfect rules. It's all just testing. Don't be afraid to be a rule breaker. Bye.